Tokyo, September 1940. In a smoke-filled room inside the Prime Minister's residence, a Japanese admiral crushed out his third lucky strike of the meeting: American cigarettes. Everyone noticed the irony. No one said a word. When Prime Minister Konoe asked, "If we go to war with America, what are our chances?" Isoroku Yamamoto answered in a flat, cold voice that had already done the math. "I can run wild for 6 months, perhaps a year. After that, I have no confidence at all." To most men in that room, it sounded like defeatism. To Yamamoto, it was the conclusion drawn from more than 20 years counting oil wells in Texas, sketching assembly lines in Detroit, listening to American steel roar inside giant mills. He knew Japan had already lost before the first shot was fired. The only question left was not, can we beat America, but how long it would take for the giant to fully wake up. And Yamamoto's tragedy was simple and cruel. The man who understood that truth more clearly than anyone else was the one ordered to design the first blow against the United States. In the first 6 months after Pearl Harbor, Japan entered the brightest surge of its modern military history. Zeros sliced across the Pacific sky, divisions advanced through Southeast Asia with a speed that stunned even American and British officers. News of Japanese victories arrived daily. Singapore collapsed, Manila fell, Allied fleets were broken. In Japan, the newspapers called it the Yamamoto era, as if every victory proved the brilliance of the admiral who had tried to stop the war before it began. But Yamamoto did not celebrate. Aboard the battleship Nagato, he read every frontline report with a silence that felt heavier than defeat. Even when Japan captured strategic jewels, Malaya, the East Indies, the Philippines, he showed no satisfaction. Because to Yamamoto, these victories meant only one thing. They were exactly what he predicted. Japan could run wild for 6 months, and they had done it with terrifying precision. But Yamamoto, unlike nearly everyone else in the empire, knew these victories were not signs of triumph, but warnings of what would come next. Warnings that the turning point was already forming, far beneath the surface. Warnings that the war's balance would flip the moment America mobilized its industrial core. He understood what no one else wanted to admit. Japan was winning battles, yet losing the war's mathematics. On December 7th, 1941, 6 Japanese carriers unleashed hundreds of aircraft on Pearl Harbor. In a few hours, 8 American battleships were sunk or crippled, nearly 200 aircraft destroyed, more than 2,000 men killed. Tactically, it was stunning. Strategically, Yamamoto saw disaster. American carriers were not in port. Fuel depots and repair facilities remained intact. A sleeping nation was now united by rage. Diplomacy was dead. Pearl Harbor gave Japan 6 months of momentum and guaranteed America years of vengeance. The fall of Singapore in February 1942 was called the worst disaster in British military history. Japan celebrated it as proof of Western weakness. Yamamoto didn't. He knew Britain was exhausted by Europe and North Africa, not inherently weak. By May 1942, Bataan and Corregidor had fallen. Thousands of prisoners were marched to their deaths. Yet Yamamoto noted something others ignored. American forces retreated in order, held their command structure, and never broke morally. They lost territory, not unity. Japan won fast. Japan won violently. Japan won spectacular territory. But it did not win what Yamamoto believed mattered. It did not destroy America's industrial heart. It did not damage America's oil supply. It did not cripple American shipyards. It did not touch the factories that would soon bury Japan under steel and fuel. Japan's front line expanded, its logistics thinned, its pilot corps bled, its industry stalled. This was the beginning of the turning point, long before Midway. While Japan celebrated, Yamamoto saw the real storm forming. U.S. shipyards moved to emergency output. Ford, GM, and Chrysler shifted to military production. Kaiser built Liberty ships in days. Pilot training surged. Aircraft production doubled in months. New factories were being built faster than Japan could replace a single carrier. What Yamamoto feared most became reality. America was rearming at a scale beyond imagination. Not small factories, not temporary workshops, entire industrial cities. Japan's clock was ticking. After Pearl Harbor, carriers became Yamamoto's obsession. He understood the Pacific would be a war of aviation, not battleships. But Japan faced three fatal problems. The American carriers escaped Pearl Harbor. Japanese reconnaissance was weak. Japan could not replace elite pilots. Every month, Japan lost irreplaceable skill. Every month, America trained replacements by the thousands. Time was not on Japan's side. In May 1942, Japan tried to seize Port Moresby. American codebreakers intercepted. The Battle of the Coral Sea ended with both sides bloodied. Japan lost Shoho, heavily damaged Shokaku. Zukaku lost its air group. The U.S. lost Lexington. But the key point, Japan's carriers would not be ready for the next battle. This forced Yamamoto into a desperate decision. Yamamoto planned Midway not to win the war, but to delay defeat. Lure America into a trap. Destroy its carriers. Shock its public. Force negotiations before U.S. industry peaked. But five things doomed Japan. America broke JN-25. Japan lacked two carriers after Coral Sea. America repaired Yorktown in 72 hours. Japan's plan was overly complex. U.S. radar gave decisive warning. June 4, 1942 would decide everything. American torpedo bombers died almost to the last aircraft. Their attack failed, but it forced Japan's carriers into a vulnerable state for just long enough. At 10:22 a.m., dauntless dive bombers found the Japanese fleet. In 5 minutes, Akagi burning, Kaga burning, Soryu burning. Here you fought back, but by nightfall, she too was gone. Japan's elite carrier force, its strategic heart, was destroyed. On the battleship Yamato, Yamamoto received the report in silence. A lieutenant asked, "Is this a complete disaster?" Yamamoto replied only, "History has chosen its path." But it ended Japan's chance to win it. Japan had lost its best pilots, lost its carriers, lost the initiative, lost the timetable, awakened America's full industrial power. The turning point was complete. For 6 months after Pearl Harbor, Japan achieved a level of military brilliance unmatched in its history. Zeros carved the sky, infantry swept through Asia, Allied positions collapsed one after another. It was a lightning storm of victories, fast, precise, overwhelming. But in Tokyo, beneath the celebrations, one man watched with growing dread. Yamamoto saw no triumph in these victories. He saw confirmation. Everything was unfolding exactly as he foretold. Japan could run wild for 6 months, and the 6 months were coming to an end. Japan's early victories were spectacular and strategically meaningless. Pearl Harbor stunned the world. It crippled the U.S. battleship line and killed more than 2,000 Americans. But Yamamoto saw the deeper consequences. The U.S. carriers survived. The oil tanks were untouched. The dockyards remained intact. America's anger was absolute. Pearl Harbor did not weaken America. It awakened it. Singapore's fall in February 1942 shocked the British Empire. Japan celebrated it as a sign of Western decay. Yamamoto knew better. Britain was overstretched. Its armies were fighting Germans and Italians across 2 continents. Victories against exhausted powers were not victories that could change the war's outcome. Japan captured the Philippines after brutal fighting, but the Americans withdrew in order, preserved their command structure, and escaped psychological collapse. Yamamoto understood the difference. To lose ground is not to lose the war. America still had its fleet, its factories, its population, its fuel, and its resolve. Japan had won territory, but not time. Japan seized vast territory, yet failed to achieve the objectives that mattered. The American mainland was untouched. U.S. shipyards were untouched. U.S. oil fields were untouched. U.S. industrial potential was untouched. Japan stretched itself thin across thousands of miles of ocean. Its logistic lines became fragile threads. Every new island captured was another burden on a supply system already collapsing under its own weight. Yamamoto knew that Japan had expanded faster than it could sustain, and far faster than it could defend. While Japan celebrated, U.S. production soared. Shipyards accelerated to emergency tempo. Ford, GM, and Chrysler turned into arsenals. Liberty ships were launched in days. Pilot training exploded in scale. Aircraft factory output doubled. And most alarming of all, the U.S. was building more factories. Not small plants, not temporary workshops. Massive industrial complexes designed to run for years. Japan had ignited a war it could not outproduce. Japan's only hope lay in crippling America's carrier force, but it faced fatal constraints. The U.S. carriers escaped Pearl Harbor. Japanese reconnaissance was unreliable. Elite Japanese pilots were irreplaceable. American pilots could be replaced in weeks. Japanese pilots took years. Every loss was permanent. In May 1942, Japan attempted to seize Port Moresby. U.S. codebreakers intercepted the plan. The Battle of the Coral Sea was the first carrier versus carrier battle in history. Japan sank the Shoho. Shokaku was heavily damaged. Zukaku lost most of its air group. The U.S. lost the Lexington. Tactically mixed, strategically decisive. Japan could not repair or rearm in time for the next battle. Yamamoto understood what that meant. The decisive clash he had tried to delay was now inevitable. Yamamoto never wanted Midway, but he saw no alternative. It was Japan's last chance to lure the American carriers, destroy them in a single stroke, shock Washington, force a negotiated peace before U.S. industry peaked. But Midway collapsed before it began. America had broken Japan's naval code. Japan lacked 2 carriers due to Coral Sea. The U.S. repaired Yorktown in only 72 hours. Japan's plan was overly complex and divided its forces. U.S. radar provided early warning and coordination. The stage was set for disaster. Japan's first strike hit Midway. American aircraft scrambled in chaotic waves. Torpedo squadrons attacked and died almost entirely. Their sacrifice bought 20 minutes. 20 minutes in which Japanese decks were cluttered with fuel hoses, bombs, and half-rearmed planes. Those 20 minutes changed the war. American SBD Dauntless dive bombers appeared from clear skies. At 10:22, Akagi burning, Kaga burning, Soryu burning. A lifetime of elite training vanished in flames. Japan's carrier power, its strategic backbone, was annihilated. Hiryu struck back and damaged Yorktown, but she too fell by nightfall. On the battleship Yamato, Yamamoto received the news in silence. A young officer asked, "Is everything lost?" Yamamoto said only, "History has chosen its path, but it had lost the ability to win it." Japan lacked pilots, carriers, fuel, industrial depth, time. America gained momentum, mastery of intelligence, technological edge, overwhelming production capacity. Midway sealed the turning point. The Pacific War shifted from Japanese offense to Japanese survival. Guadalcanal was not a battle. It was a grinder, a test of supply chains, fuel, pilots, and endurance. Japan fought fiercely, but U.S. logistics were superior. U.S. artillery was constant. U.S. air cover grew stronger. U.S. reinforcements arrived endlessly. Japan sent elite units. They died. Japan sent more. They starved. The pattern repeated until there was nothing elite left to send. Guadalcanal proved Yamamoto right. Industrial war crushes valor. While others clung to hope, Yamamoto saw the truth. Japan's losses were irreplaceable. America's losses were temporary. Carrier warfare favored the side with factories. Fuel mattered more than bravery. Logistics mattered more than spirit. Mathematics mattered more than slogans. He had warned them. They ignored him. Now the war was simply fulfilling his prediction. 6 months of glory, years of collapse. Japan still held territory, but it had lost the war's rhythm. America surged forward with new carriers, new pilots, new radar, new codes, new fuel, new factories. Japan fought bravely. But bravery could not stop arithmetic. The turning point was over. The path ahead was inevitable. After Midway, the Pacific War entered a different age. On maps, Japan still controlled an empire stretching from Manchuria to the Solomons. On paper, its defensive perimeter looked immense, almost unbreakable. But the map was a lie. Inside every ship, every airfield, every supply depot, the truth was far colder. Oil reserves shrinking. Transports sinking faster than they could be built. Veteran pilots dying with no replacements. Factories starving for steel, aluminum, and fuel. Frontline troops hungry, sick, exhausted. Japan looked powerful on the surface, but inside something vital was dying, and Yamamoto, more than anyone, could see it. He was now living inside the prophecy he made years earlier. He had warned that Japan lacked the industrial strength for a long war. He had warned that America was a giant asleep. He had warned that early victories would blind Tokyo to coming disaster. Now those warnings were no longer predictions. They were daily reports on his desk. That was the beginning of the hell within. If Midway destroyed Japan's carrier force, Guadalcanal destroyed its last hope. The island looked insignificant on a globe, but it was a perfect test of industrial war. Who could supply more? Who could endure more? Who could replace more? Who could sustain operations month after month? Japan's answer to those questions was always the same: not enough. Japanese troops on Guadalcanal fought with extraordinary bravery, but bravery could not cure malaria, starvation, lack of ammunition, no medicine, rotting food, unreliable supply lines, total absence of heavy artillery support. Meanwhile, American troops suffered too, but they were fed, reinforced, supplied, and treated. Guadalcanal revealed the future. Japan would bleed while America would replenish. Yamamoto understood that this was not a battle Japan could win. It was a test Japan was never built to pass. Inside the Solomon Islands jungle, Japanese soldiers lived in a nightmare no slogan could soften. Bodies eaten by disease, stomachs empty for days, uniforms soaked and rotting, ammunition rationed like gold, wounded dying without bandages, men collapsing from hunger before seeing the enemy. The empire told them they fought for honor. Reality told them they had been sent into a war the nation could not support. Every lost transport meant thousands more soldiers would suffer. Every sunken ship meant fewer rations. Every failed mission meant more men doomed to starvation. Yamamoto read the reports. He knew these soldiers were dying not from enemy fire, but from the very structure of Japan's war effort. That was another layer of the hell within. Japan's economy could not produce enough transports. Worse, the ones that existed were unarmored civilian ships turned into supply vessels. The U.S. submarine force began tearing them apart. Convoy after convoy vanished beneath the waves. For every ship sunk, Yamamoto knew the consequences. Aircraft would not arrive. Fuel would not arrive. Artillery shells would not arrive. Food would not arrive. Japanese soldiers did not starve by accident. They starved because the empire could not protect what fed them. And for Yamamoto, each new X on the logistics charts felt like a quiet verdict on the war's future. Frontline soldiers suffered physically. Yamamoto suffered intellectually and morally. Every morning he read, fuel consumption, pilot losses, aircraft shortages, American production estimates, shipbuilding rates, submarine sinkings, industrial output comparisons. Every column of numbers pointed to one truth: Japan could not win. He had said it before the war. He saw it confirmed during the war. He lived it every day after Midway. Yet he could not resign. He could not refuse orders. He could not stop the war. He could only continue to lead forces toward an outcome he knew was mathematically hopeless. That is a unique kind of torment, to understand the future, yet be powerless to change it. Japan was entering the stage of the war where statistics became lethal. Yamamoto read them like a man reading a medical chart of a dying patient. Oil reserves dwindling. Refinery output collapsing. Pilot training limited. Aircraft production stagnating. Transports destroyed faster than built. Submarines overwhelming supply lines. The U.S. producing planes, ships, and tanks on an impossible scale. He once calculated American industrial potential while standing inside the factories of Detroit and Texas. Now he watched that potential turn into reality, and into Japan's nightmare. Inside Japan, Yamamoto was distrusted by extremists. He studied in America. He admired American engineering. He spoke well of Americans. He warned against war with the U.S. To the militarists, that made him suspicious. Yet among Americans who knew him personally, intelligence officers, admirals, diplomats, he was respected as the one Japanese leader who truly understood them. A strange, isolating paradox, condemned at home for knowing America too well. Respected by America for understanding it too clearly, this emotional isolation deepened the hell within. Throughout late 1942 and early 1943, Yamamoto visited forward bases, Rabaul, Truk, airfields carved from jungle, destroyer squadrons running on fumes. He saw younger pilots, fewer veterans, older aircraft, dwindling fuel, shortages of parts, exhausted maintenance crews. He told officers, "Preserve your pilots. Every death costs 5 years of training. Do not waste them in hopeless attacks." He said the words. but he knew they could not change the battlefield's arithmetic. Japan was losing its elite airmen faster than it could train replacements. It was a slow-motion collapse. By 1943, Japan faced a question it refused to confront. Continue fighting for honor or face the truth and negotiate? The political and military leadership chose honor. Yamamoto saw truth. He knew every additional month of war meant more pilots lost, more soldiers starving, more ships sunk, more civilians exposed. No possible path to victory. But he was a soldier in a system that worshipped obedience. So he stayed and carried out a war he knew was unwinnable. That moral conflict was perhaps the deepest hell within. By early 1943, Yamamoto decided to visit frontline units again, to encourage pilots, to see the damage firsthand, and perhaps to share their fate. Multiple officers later said he seemed less cautious, almost accepting of danger. Whether consciously or not, he walked toward destiny. In April 1943, he boarded a G-4M bomber for another inspection tour, a journey that would intersect with American code-breaking, long-range fighters, and wartime vengeance. His physical death was near, but his internal death, the death of hope, the death of strategic possibility, had already happened long before. That was the final shape of the hell within. By early 1943, Japan still held a vast defensive perimeter, an empire that stretched across thousands of miles. On maps, it looked formidable, but maps hide weakness. Yamamoto no longer judged the war by territory. He judged it by fuel consumption, ship losses, aircraft shortages, and industrial output. And every chart, every report, every number confirmed what he had foreseen long before the war began. Japan was losing a contest of production, logistics, and time. Oil shipments were shrinking. Pilot losses were catastrophic. Factories lacked raw materials. Transports were disappearing under American submarine attacks. The empire still looked whole from a distance, but its internal organs were failing. Yamamoto understood that Japan had entered the final phase of the war, a phase in which defeat would come slowly, mathematically, and relentlessly. Japan's high command still spoke of reversing the situation. They imagined one great victory, one decisive battle, one shock that could force America to negotiate. Yamamoto saw fantasy. He pointed to numbers, calmly, quietly. The U.S. had replaced the Pearl Harbor losses twice over. American pilot training dwarfed Japan's. U.S. oil production was beyond comparison. American factories were expanding even during wartime. U.S. shipyards were launching vessels faster than Japan could sink them. This was not pessimism, it was arithmetic. In a war of mass production, Japan was fighting a giant with an endless supply of steel, fuel, and manpower. The war was no longer a clash of navies. It was an execution carried out by industry. On April 14, 1943, the Japanese Navy announced Yamamoto's inspection tour of frontline bases in the Solomons. He wanted to meet surviving pilots, inspect fuel and supply levels, encourage exhausted units, and show the troops that their commander was not hiding far behind the lines. But to those closest to him, something felt different. Officers later recalled that Yamamoto seemed less cautious, almost resigned. He traveled more often, took more risks, and stopped worrying about danger. Some believed he sensed the war's trajectory and no longer feared death. Some believed he felt a duty to face the consequences alongside his men. Others believed he simply followed orders with the same discipline he practiced his entire life. Whatever the reason, he boarded the plane. And at that moment, his fate intersected with American codebreakers. Since 1942, U.S. intelligence had broken the Japanese naval code JN-25. Early April 1943, they intercepted a message. Yamamoto would depart Rabaul at 0600, fly in a G-4M Betty bomber, be escorted by 60 fighters, land at Balalai at 0800. It was exact to the minute. The Americans faced a decision: should they kill the architect of Pearl Harbor? Would this reveal that they had broken Japan's codes? Was it worth the risk? The answer from Washington: yes. Yamamoto was not just a commander. He was the only Japanese leader who fully understood American industrial might. His death would leave Japan without its most realistic strategist. 18 P-38 Lightnings were selected for a long-range interception, a mission near the limits of their endurance. The operation was given a name: Operation Vengeance. The P-38 was chosen not for maneuverability, but for long range, high speed, heavy armament, and the ability to fly extremely low to avoid detection. It was a product of the very industrial machine Yamamoto had studied in America: mass-produced Allison engines, aluminum refined in quantities Japan could not imagine, advanced aviation research backed by national resources, high-octane fuel from the oil fields he once toured in Texas. The aircraft that hunted him was the embodiment of everything he had warned Japan about. The P-38s took off from Guadalcanal, flying 435 miles, far beyond typical combat range, skimming the ocean to evade radar. Every second of the flight was calculated. Every mile was a demonstration of American precision. Ironically, it matched the precision with which Yamamoto once evaluated American potential. At 0934 hours, the Americans saw the incoming formation. A P-38 pilot radioed, "Visual contact! Target in sight!" Moments later, the sky erupted. The Zeros fought desperately, but the P-38s dove faster and struck harder. Yamamoto's G-4M was hit. The bomber spiraled down into the jungle of Bougainville. When search teams found him, he was still seated upright, hand resting on his sword. A commander who had met the end without turning away. His final journey lasted only minutes. His final prophecy had taken years to unfold. Admiral Manechi Koga replaced him, capable, loyal, disciplined, but without Yamamoto's deep insight into America. He had never walked Detroit's assembly lines. He had never watched Texas oil pumps. He had never studied American psychology firsthand. Without Yamamoto, Japan drifted into darker illusions. The months that followed, Gilbert's, Marshall's, the Marianas, showed the cost of losing the one man who understood the true nature of the war. Japan fought bravely. America fought endlessly. And only one of those was sustainable. In the last 2 years of the war, American industry unleashed its full potential. 300,000 aircraft, more than 140 carriers, 33 million tons of shipping, B-24 bombers rolling off the line every 63 minutes, fleets of B-29s crossing the Pacific, mass-produced weapons, fuel, vehicles, radar systems. A machine the size of a continent had awakened. Japan could not match it. Japan could not slow it. Japan could only endure it. This was the world Yamamoto had seen coming in the 1920s, a world in which industry was the true battlefield. When B-29s appeared over Tokyo, the prophecy was complete. Yamamoto had once walked through the American factories that produced aluminum, engines, precision instruments, advanced fuels. Now he would have recognized each sound of the air raid, the deep drone of heavy bombers, the thunder of incendiaries, the collapse of wooden suburbs, the inability of Japan to respond. Japan lacked radar, fuel, aircraft, and pilots. America had all of them in overwhelming quantity. On August 6, 1945, the atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima. Three principles Yamamoto had preached converged in one flash: America's unmatched scientific capability, America's limitless industrial investment, America's determination once provoked. The bomb was not magic. It was the ultimate product of industry, science, and national will. The same forces Yamamoto had tried to warn his government about long before the war. When Nagasaki fell 3 days later, Japan's leaders finally understood what he had seen from the beginning. They had never truly understood their enemy. In declassified documents and memoirs, American officers spoke of him with respect. Ellis Zacharias: Yamamoto understood America better than most Americans. Nimitz: he was a strategist, not a fanatic. American intelligence officers said, "We killed the one man who might have ended the war sooner." And Japanese officials, after the empire fell, admitted, "He spoke truth. We believed in illusions." The tragedy was complete. After Japan's surrender, investigators found unsent letters in Yamamoto's personal effects, one to the emperor, one to his successor. Several private reflections. They contained the same warnings he had spoken for 20 years. Japan lacked the oil. Japan lacked the steel. Japan lacked the industrial base. Japan lacked the time. Morale could not substitute for production. Spirit could not compensate for fuel. In one striking passage he wrote, "Every ship we lose, they replace with 3. Every aircraft we shoot down, they replace with 10. Every gallon of fuel we burn, they have 1,000,000 more. We are not fighting a nation. We are fighting an industrial continent." It was not bitterness. It was truth. Historians now see Yamamoto not simply as the architect of Pearl Harbor, but as one of the rare strategists who understood the nature of 20th century conflict. War is powered by industry. Oil is the blood of modern armies. Production speed determines victory. Technology multiplies force more than courage can. He understood that modern war is not won by decisive battles, but by decisive economies. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor, June 4th, 1942, Midway. Exactly 6 months. 6 months of Japanese dominance. 6 months of victories across half the Pacific. And then the collapse began. Yamamoto's warning had been perfect. No one knows what Yamamoto thought in the last seconds of his life, but his writings suggest he felt no surprise. He had warned them. He had calculated the outcome. He had seen the shape of the future long before others did. His tragedy was not miscalculation, it was clarity. He understood a war that his nation insisted on misunderstanding. In the end, Yamamoto did not lose to American admirals. He lost to American industry, the same force he had tried and failed to get his country to respect. That is the final reflection. A man caught between truth and loyalty, between foresight and duty, between what he knew and what he was forced to do. A life shaped by prophecy, a death shaped by destiny, and a war shaped by mathematics.